Hey, this is Stefan, and welcome to this presentation on how you can transform your physique with bioadaptive training in just 3 to 5 hours a week. Now, if you've been training consistently for years, but feel stuck, like you're just spinning your wheels and not seeing any progress, then this presentation is for you. I'm going to show you a smarter, more effective way to train so you can make more progress in the next few months than you have in years. So let's not waste any time, let's get right into it. Now, before I dive into it, let's first address some of the biggest misconceptions holding people back from getting in shape. Most people believe their genetics, age, lack of time, hormones, or metabolism are stopping them from achieving their ideal physique. But is that really the case? Let's take a quick moment to break each of these down. You might think your genetics or age are what's stopping you, but unless your goal is stepping on the Mr. Olympia stage, that is simply not true. For example, in my own case, no one in my family has ever been shredded or jacked. By the time my dad was my age, he was a type 2 diabetic with a 40+ inch waist. If that was purely due to age and genetics, that would have also been my fate. But I never let that become my excuse, and you shouldn't settle for that either. The reality is that every relatively healthy person can get lean and build muscle, even in their 30s, 40s, and beyond. I have clients in their 30s, 40s, and even 50s and 60s who are now in the best shape of their lives and doing things they couldn't even do in their 20s. So yes, age and genetics can influence how your body responds, but they don't stop progress. The right training and nutrition strategies can override these limitations. Now, what about time? Well, chances are you're already spending enough time in the gym, but the problem isn't time, it's how that time is being used. Without proper progression and recovery, you could be putting in hours every week with nothing to show for it. The truth is, very few people need more than 3 to 5 hours a week to maximize results. Even when I'm prepping for a physique show or a photo shoot, I don't train more than 5 hours a week. So if you're not seeing progress or if you're not seeing results in 3 to 5 hours a week, you don't need to train more, you need to reevaluate your strategy. Later on, I'll walk you through some case studies to show how the right approach to cycling your training and nutrition can help you maximize results without spending more time in the gym. Now lastly, before we move on, let's address hormones and metabolism. Many people believe their hormones and metabolism are holding them back. And look, in some cases, they might be partly right. Low testosterone or thyroid levels can indeed make building muscle and losing body fat more challenging. But here's the key. These issues can be addressed with proper training, nutrition, and supplementation protocols. If you spent years crash dieting or doing excessive cardio, there's a good chance you've tanked your testosterone or metabolism. And if you keep following the same path, you're only making things worse. But if you adopt the approach I'm about to show you, you can reverse these negative metabolic adaptations, and in most cases, you won't need drugs or hormone replacement therapy. Now, this is just a small sample of some of my client transformations over the years. And if you jump on my Instagram page, you will see countless more. The reason I wanted to share that with you is so you can see that I'm not just some trainer that rocked up yesterday. I've been doing this for over 20 years now, and I have the results to back it up. So you can rest assured what I'm about to show you is legit. But before we go any further, I want to take a moment to be upfront about who this approach is really for, and just as importantly, who it is not for. Firstly, this isn't for those searching for the perfect program, because there's no single plan that will work for everyone 100% of the time. This also isn't for people who just want to do a bit of casual exercise to get a bit fitter. There are plenty of general fitness programs out there. This system is for people who want serious results. Also, if tracking your progress in numbers feels like too much effort, this method probably isn't for you. Because here's the truth. If you don't track, you're just guessing, and guessing leads to frustration, plateaus, and wasted time. This system also isn't for lifters who are stuck in their old ways or lifters who care more about smashing themselves in the gym than actually making measurable progress. Bioadaptive training is about maximizing results, not chasing exhaustion for the sake of feeling like you worked hard. Now, this is perfect for you if you're someone who's been training consistently for years, but you've been stuck in a plateau and you're tired of spinning your wheels. It's also perfect for new lifters who want to save years of wasted time and frustration by starting out on the right path from the get-go. I wish someone would have shown me this when I first started out, because I would have got to where I am today in a third of the time. This is also for you if you're a busy individual who loves training but doesn't have hours to waste in the gym, and you're looking for a cutting-edge approach that helps you get the most out of your efforts. And finally, this is also for coaches looking to help their clients get better results in less time. In fact, about a third of my clients are coaches themselves, and they come to me not only so they can level up their own physique, but so they can also take away the tools to help their clients transform. So, if any of these sound like you, then you're definitely in the right place. Now, before I break down the BioAdaptive Method, I want to take a moment to share my personal story so you can better understand how I arrived at this point. I began my career as a trainer back in 2002 at just 19 years old. I hired my first coach in 2012 when I decided to enter my first bodybuilding competition. At that point, I had already been in the industry for 10 years. I had completed my master's degree, taken numerous courses with industry leaders, and I was already in pretty good shape. But I was new to the comp scene and I had never taken my physique to that extreme level, so I wanted to get some proper guidance. Now, that ended up being one of the best decisions I ever made because it took my career on a whole new trajectory. I got in the best shape of my life for that first comp and I ended up placing third. Then, over the next few years, from 2012 to 2015, I worked with several world-renowned coaches, learning from some of the best minds in the industry. Now, some of those experiences were great, some not so great, but I valued each of them regardless because of the knowledge and experience that I gained in the process. For example, when I worked with Milos Sarcev, even though I love Milos and he's trained numerous world champion bodybuilders, his methods did not work for me. I wasn't like his other clients. I wasn't taking a boatload of steroids and I was still putting in 40 plus hours a week on the gym floor as a trainer. I didn't have the luxury of just training, eating, sleeping, and being pharmacologically assisted like all his other clients. So his giant sets method just broke me down, and the comp that I did under his guidance, I actually looked the worst I ever have on stage. Still, I'm grateful for that experience because I learned that I'm capable of pushing myself to the extremes, and if I didn't get the outcome I was after, it wasn't due to lack of trying. Even Milos himself admitted after we finished up that his methodology is extreme and it's best suited to those with elite genetics who take a lot of gear and their lives revolve around training, eating, and sleeping. Yet, we never pivoted or changed course the entire time. And that was a central theme with almost all the coaches I had worked with. They each had their own way of doing things and they stuck to their way. In other words, they weren't very flexible in their approach. Now, that all changed after working with Charles Poliquin. I had been taking courses with Charles since 2010, and in 2015, I finally convinced him to coach me personally. At that point, he wasn't actively coaching clients anymore, so he actually did me a favor by taking me on, and it didn't come cheap. It cost me 10 grand to work with Charles for 4 months, but it was well worth it because he was the last coach I ever needed. And what made Charles different was that his approach was very customized and fluid. He would monitor my training loads after each session and seek feedback on how I was feeling. Then he would make real-time adjustments to the plan based on how I was responding. So it was a very dynamic process, and I learned so much about my individual blueprint and how my body responds throughout that process. Now, after finishing up with Charles, I continued tweaking and refining things for myself. I was no longer afraid to experiment and think outside the box. Charles got me 80% of the way there, but I had to get the rest of the way there on my own. For the first time ever, I started to trust myself above anyone else. After all, no one knew my own body better than I did. That year, I made some of the best progress I ever made and won my first bodybuilding show prepping myself. Up to that point, the highest I had ever placed under someone else's guidance was third. Even better was the fact that this was the cruisiest prep I had ever done. I didn't suffer anywhere near as much as any of my previous comp, and that's because I was working with my body instead of against it. That's also when I started implementing this coaching methodology with clients, and things gradually began to evolve from there. As I started implementing this approach with my clients, I began closely monitoring their training loads and biofeedback metrics, which included things like energy levels, libido, mood, appetite, and so forth. And as wearable technology became more readily available, I also started tracking sleep duration, sleep quality, step count, and heart rate variability. And the more data I collected, the more I saw just how much individual responses to training and nutrition can vary. You can give the exact same program to two people, and that program can take on a completely different trajectory based on their individual responses. In some people, certain exercises and muscle groups may respond significantly faster than others, and individual responses to training volume and caloric restriction can vary by a factor of 2 or more. In other words, one person may be able to handle twice as much training volume as another before running into recovery issues, or may need to reduce their caloric intake twice as much to achieve the same weight loss. That's when I realized there is no one-size-fits-all approach. You have to adapt your method to fit the individual, not the other way around. Unfortunately, these days we see a lot of polarizing opinions on social media, everyone claiming their way is the best. But let's be real, anyone who says there's only one best method that works for everyone all of the time is quite frankly full of shit. Take for example, one of the latest fads floating around right now, which is propagated by so-called evidence-based fitness influencers, that anything over 8 reps or 2 sets per muscle group will cause excess fatigue, even though we have an overwhelming amount of evidence to suggest otherwise. Unfortunately, it's much easier to sell people on overly simplified concepts that require minimal effort. That's why I was very clear from the start of this presentation who this method is for and who it is not for. So, how does the bioadaptive method differ from conventional approaches? Well, here's the problem with the conventional approach. Most people are stuck following rigid, cookie-cutter programs regardless of their individual needs or how their body actually responds. For example, I've had women come to me following bro splits with 3 to 4 exercises just for their biceps and triceps alone. I didn't even do that much volume for my arms, and they're a priority muscle group for me. So clearly that program isn't very well suited for them. On the other hand, I've seen both men and women smashing themselves with circuits and excess cardio while completely neglecting heavy strength training. That's not optimal either. The balance between cardio and strength needs to be based on your current fitness and strength level and evolves over time. What about nutrition? Well, if you blindly follow some 1400 or 2000 calorie meal plan, you're ignoring your individual metabolism and specific dietary needs, and you're not taking into account how the metabolism compensates over time. Here's the truth. No single nutrition plan or training program works forever. Your body is a living, adaptable organism, not a machine. That's why training and nutrition must be strategic, constantly evolving, and based on how your body is responding. And that's exactly how the bioadaptive method works, because instead of forcing your body into a rigid mold, it is designed to respond, adapt, and optimize for you. So what exactly does that look like in practice? Well, it means your acute training load and program adjust dynamically based on biofeedback and real-time performance, not arbitrary numbers. It means tailoring nutrition to support your metabolism and recovery instead of blindly following fixed calorie and macro targets. It means planning overreaching and recovery cycles based on physiological data, not just pushing harder, switching up workouts, or randomly taking time off just for the sake of it. And that is the key difference. One system forces you to fit into a model that may or may not work for you. The other works with your body to maximize efficiency and results. Alright, So let's break down the BioAdaptive method into its respective phases. These are the exact steps I take a client through when we start working together. The first phase is what I call the launch phase. This typically lasts 5 to 7 days and is broken down into 2 key steps. Step 1 is establishing your baseline. Before you can optimize your training, recovery, and nutrition, you need to know exactly where you're starting from. Think of it like your starting point on a map. If you don't know where you are, you can't navigate towards your destination. Without that reference, you're just guessing. In this step, we assess the key metrics that shape your initial plan, such as your body composition, strength and fitness level, weekly training volume, diet composition, and your biofeedback markers like your energy, libido, appetite, digestion, sleep quality, and heart rate variability. Now, with some clients, I may even take it a step further and analyze their blood work for even deeper insights. And this gives us real-world clarity into exactly where you're at so that every decision moving forward is based on data, not guesswork. Step 2 is constructing your custom plan. Once we've established your baseline, the next step is crafting a strategic blueprint which includes a tailored training, nutrition, and supplementation plan based on your individual needs. And this sets the stage for phase 2, where we start refining and adjusting based on your body's actual response. Phase 2 is what I call the breakthrough phase, because most people who come to me have been stuck in a plateau for a while, and this is the process I use to break them out of it. This phase typically lasts 8 to 12 weeks, depending on the person's training history and their current state. Now, one or more things usually needs to happen to bust someone out of a plateau. With about 90% of clients, I will generally start them on a muscle resensitization phase, which is a period of lower volume, lower intensity training aimed at restoring the muscle sensitivity to exercise-induced loading. If you've been training with fairly high volume for months on end, the muscles have likely become quite desensitized to the training stimulus, and you eventually reach a point where adding more work becomes impractical. A few short weeks of lower volume, lower intensity training allows those intermediary fibers to revert back to their original pure fast twitch isoform and makes them more responsive to exercise-induced loading again. That's why every time you take a break from training, you feel more sore again when you get back in the gym, usually at a much lower volume than what you were previously doing. So this resensitization phase in essence allows us to come back to a lower volume and start making progress again, and it also provides a nice break for your connective tissues and joints. After the resensitization phase, we start implementing bioadaptive progression, where the weekly training load is adjusted dynamically based on real-time biofeedback and performance data. So the intensity, volume, and workload evolve in alignment with your body's needs to ensure continual progression while preventing overtraining or stagnation. With about 60% of clients, I'll also run a metabolic optimization phase. And I'll typically do this with clients that have been in a severe caloric deficit for a prolonged period and their metabolism has taken a hit. By gradually increasing energy intake over a 6 to 8 week period, we can restore metabolic rate and hormonal balance and essentially prime the body to be able to lose fat efficiently again at a more modest caloric deficit. You'll see exactly how this plays out in a couple of upcoming case studies. Now, after the breakthrough phase comes the ascension phase. After we've broken out of the plateau, we want to make sure progress continues, and we don't want to hit another plateau again until we've reached our end goal. We do this by strategically managing recovery and adaptation using structured micro-progression, macro-progression, and recovery cycles. Micro-progression refers to the week-to-week adjustments in training loads such as the sets, reps, and weight. These are adjusted based on performance and biofeedback markers, not some rigid template. Just to be clear here, training according to your biofeedback is not the same as training based on how you feel on the day. You need to look at everything collectively, like your previous performance and the 7-day trend in things like your heart rate variability, sleep, energy, libido, mood, and so forth, because making sporadic adjustments to your workload can actually hamper progress. Now, beyond the week-to-week adjustments, you also need long-term progression through strategic periodization so that your training and nutrition evolves over months, not just weeks. This is what macro progression refers to. And since your body adapts to a given stimulus over time, this ensures continual improvement instead of hitting a wall. Lastly, and equally important, is planning recovery or restoration cycles. It is not possible to continue adding in work or cutting calories indefinitely. At some point, you're going to hit a wall. That's why planning recovery cycles are essential to keeping your body responsive to training. These recovery phases allow muscle resensitization to take place, the connective tissues and joints to heal, and for the metabolism and hormones to reset so that when you start pushing harder again, your body is primed to make progress. This is how you can continue progressing for months on end without hitting a plateau or getting injured. And just like every aspect of the BioAdaptive method, recovery cycles should be implemented when needed, not set arbitrarily. Scaling back at the wrong time can actually hurt progress, so instead of following a fixed schedule, you need to learn how to observe and work with your body's natural cycles. Okay, now that we've covered how the BioAdaptive method works, let's go over a couple of case studies to see how this plays out in the real world. The first case study is Lindsay. When Lindsay first came to me, she was in her mid-30s, and as you can see, she was already in pretty good shape. According to her skin folds, she was sitting at 24% body fat, which is right at that healthy range for a female. However, she wanted to get a bit leaner, and it seemed like no matter what she was doing, it wasn't working. She was already down to 1400 calories and smashing herself hard in the gym 5 to 6 days a week. So dropping calories further or adding in more exercise really wasn't an option. This is what we did instead. We scaled back her training to 3 days per week initially, allowing accumulated fatigue to dissipate and her muscles to resensitize to the training stimulus. From there, we gradually increased her training volume and calories until she reached 2400 calories without gaining body fat. We then held her at 2400 calories for a couple of weeks, giving her metabolism and hormones a chance to reset before pulling her back to 17 to 1900 calories for her fat loss phase. For the most part, she trained 4 days per week during this period, so she actually lost fat on more calories and less training than where she had previously been stuck, because she actually gave her body a chance to reset. Now, we also did have short periods during the fat loss phase where she did come out of the deficit temporarily and scaled back her training volume, which also helped her stay on the higher calories because her metabolism didn't take as much of a hit. In the end, she ended up dropping down to 14% on the skin folds in the first 6 months. We then took her back out of the deficit for a few weeks to give her a proper reset, and then she ended up doing a photo shoot a couple of months later where she got even leaner for that. The leanest she got to was actually 12.6% body fat on the skin folds. Now, after the shoot, we let her body fat come back up to 14 to 15% where she was most comfortable, and she pretty much stayed on around 24 to 2500 calories. So let's take a look at another case study now. I want to give you a couple of different examples so you can see how this method plays out in different circumstances. Here we have Hamish. When Hamish started with me, he was in his early 40s, he had just sold several of his businesses, and he wanted to get his health back so he can set a positive example for his 3 children. When he came to me, he had already been trying to get in shape, and although he was relatively fit because he had been doing a lot of cardio, he still had quite a bit of body fat to lose. He was sitting around 28% body fat on the skin folds. So here's what we did. We initially scaled back his training to just 3 days a week with a focus on resistance training instead of cardio. We also started gradually pushing up his calories because he had made his metabolism so efficient from months of under eating and doing excess cardio that he needed to reset. Now, almost immediately, he started seeing massive improvements in his energy and strength. And because Hamish was in finance and he was a numbers guy, seeing his numbers in his lifts going up each week was very motivating to him. In fact, his bench press went from 135 pounds or around 60 kilograms to about 180 pounds in the first 4 months. And eventually we got him up to about 230 for reps. Another interesting thing that happened is that Hamish actually lost body fat in the early stages of pushing his calories up. In fact, the before picture that you see was taken 3 to 4 weeks into his transformation, where he had already come down from 28 to 24% body fat. Now, eventually, we got him up to about 3,200 calories, held him there for a couple of weeks, then dropped him down to 25 to 2,700 calories to take the rest of the fat off. So, he ended up getting down to about 17.5% in 4 months. Then after that, he decided he wanted to come out of the deficit and just focus on getting stronger because he actually enjoyed that more than getting shredded. And as I mentioned previously, eventually we ended up getting his bench up to 230 pounds for reps, and he was very happy with that. Alright, one last case study to seal the deal. This here is Stewie. Stewie had already been training several years. He was fairly strong and he was relatively lean and muscular. However, he had plateaued and he wanted to take things to the next level. So that's exactly what we did. Now, unlike the last 2 case studies, Stewie had not been undereating, so there was no need for a metabolic optimization phase. We just had to tighten up his nutrition so he can dial in his conditioning while maintaining as much muscle as possible. But in actuality, he not only dropped 8.5% body fat in 5 months, he also gained 4 kilos of lean mass, which is about 9 pounds. And the reason he was able to do that was because we cycled his nutrition and dialed in his training for maximal effectiveness. We started with a 3-week resensitization phase by pulling back his volume initially, then started progressively ramping up his volume and intensity from there. So even before anyone was ever talking about it, I was implementing volume cycling with clients and teaching it to other trainers as far back as 2015, when I was still in the early stages of formulating the BioAdaptive Method. Back then, we just used to call it the INEV method. Today, the research is finally starting to catch up, and although it's still in the early stages, recent studies suggest that cycling volume may be superior to maintaining a constant volume. And I firmly believe if these studies were extended over months or years, the benefits would compound over time. I see this in practice all the time because volume and nutrition cycling are how I help my clients break through plateaus and keep making progress for months, even years on end. So, by this point, I hope I've made the case for why bioadaptive training should be the only way to train, because instead of following some rigid system, you're giving your body exactly what it needs at any point in time. It is highly specific to you, not anybody else. Now, I'll be honest, training this way isn't as simple or clear-cut as some other rigid philosophies like one set to failure. Those systems are easy to sell because they're simple and require minimal effort, but they usually yield minimal results. Optimizing your training is a skill, and like any other skill, it takes time and experience to fine-tune and master that skill. So, right now you have 2 options. You can take everything I've laid out today, the principles, strategies, and logic, and try to figure it out on your own. And look, if you stay consistent, keep experimenting, and persevere long enough, eventually you will. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you need me, because if I can figure out my blueprint, you can figure out yours too. But if you want to fast track the process, avoid years of trial and error, and get real results in the next few months, then I suggest booking a call with me or sending me a DM on Instagram. We can go through your specific situation, assess exactly where you're at with things, and see if there's an opportunity for me to help you dial in your training and nutrition properly. So if that sounds like something that would actually be valuable for you, then go ahead and book that call or send me a DM. You'll find all the details below. And finally, thank you so much for tuning into this presentation. I hope it's been eye-opening, and I hope to speak with you soon.